Our first speaker is Margaret Graziano. Margaret is a speaker, best-selling author, executive coach, consultant, and really the heart and soul of Keen Alignment. Margaret's groundbreaking work is driven by her passion to discover and catalyze human potential, which I think is kind of relevant to all of us, both individually and as leaders. At the leading edge of conscious leadership, organizational development, and corporate cultural alignment, Margaret has been named one of Silicon Valley's top 100 influential women in business, which is quite an accomplishment and recognition. And in this session, Margaret's going to be sharing with us her expertise in culture, change, and development, and offering really a transformative resource for all of us as leaders. With that, I'd love to bring Margaret up to the stage.
I think I'm on. Can you hear me? Yep. And even if the mic wasn't, you probably could hear me. So thank you for being here today. We've got just under 30 minutes. So I'm going to go rapid, and we're going to have time for questions at the end. So culture is energy, and energy has the power to create or the power to destroy. Also has the power to stagnate. We are energy. We're always emitting something. Is it positive or negative is the question. So this is a tech conference, and I actually started to think, well, that's why they had us come here, because when my book was read, we talk about emergent culture, and emergent culture is creating fertile ground for innovation to occur. And what's required in an emergent culture, you might say agile, but it's so much more than that, is people need to trust that you actually care what they have to say. You don't always have to implement everything they give you, but they need to trust, just like David White said, that you're turning into the problem and not turning away from the problem. They also need to believe that what you're doing, I don't know if my pointer works, so just imagine I'm pointing to noble cause. People need to believe that what your organization is doing actually matters and makes the world a better place. I was at one of these conferences with CEOs, though, in the room, and some guy says, well, my noble cause is making a lot of money. And I said, but that's your noble cause for you. That's not going to inspire 1,000 people or 500 people or even 25 people. And so my question for you is your company up to something that is actually making the world better? And if so, do you articulate that in a way that even if a person is bagging trash or shipping boxes or working on in the factory, that they can see that what they're doing is actually noble? And why this is so important is because in a world where we are thrust with volatility, uncertainty, chaos, confusion, complexity, people are massively distracted. The news is saying that productivity is lower than it's been in 50 years, and people are blaming that on the remote workforce. That would be happening even if people were in the office, because we have massive cognitive scattering, which I'll talk about in a minute. So if you want to intervene in cognitive scattering and you want people to opt in, I hate being on the stage, but I know people need to see me. So then you have to have something noble for them to hook to. Self-actualization is one of the most important aspects for a human being, to feel that they matter and they're doing something that matters. How I get self-actualized at work is because I feel like I'm up to something. When I say from goals to mission, it doesn't mean that the goals aren't important. If your company's not achieving, you're not going to have a company. But it's about so much more than that. And then these shared values, most organizations have values. They have them, they're on the wall in the conference room, and then when you ask the CEO what the values are, they have to pull out their PDA and text their assistant. Seriously. So most people are in a job taking care of themselves to make sure they keep the job. They're producing, they're working as an individual contributor. When your values are created in a way that tap into people's very essence of who they're being, and they're collectively appreciated, trained to, and demonstrated, you can get people to row in the same direction for that noble cause. But it all begins with a noble cause, and then the values need to tap into people's essence so that they can participate as a team. That's how you create exceptional teamwork. If I had more time, I'd tell you stories about that, but I want to get through all of the information. Unique talents. We talked about this last night, and I know a lot of you weren't there. So, and the question was, will AI threaten people, and how do you perceive that? Well, most people that are knowledge workers want to use their knowledge at work. If they're doing low-level tasks, repetitive tasks, they don't feel self-actualized at work. It actually takes HR a lot more effort to have people feel self-actualized that are doing routine tasks. So anything and everything that we can automate so that they can be doing the thinking of how to make the business better, of how to innovate, of how to be market leaders, no matter what role they're in the company, they have thoughts and they see things that we can't always see. So really looking at not just your hiring process, but how are you leveraging people's genius at work? And bigger than that, tapping into the collective genius. What are you doing? Do you have architecture that helps tap into people's contribution and not only lets you lean into them, but helps them express what they need to express? So we all want a team that works well together, but do we have systems and structures in place for that to happen? Do we have innovation days? Do we have workshops? And do we use liberating structures so that people can contribute at that level? This is what's happening. You've got some people working like crazy maniacs, doing the same routine over and over again, and then you have other people kind of, why am I here? Do I matter here? There's 4 basic human beings. All people have them. 1, they need certainty. Now, this was terrible during COVID because nobody had certainty about anything. 2, they need uncertainty or novelty, meaning stretch, growth, challenge. 3, they need to know they matter, they're significant. And 4, they need human connection. You've got a remote workforce. What are you doing? What do you need to do to give them connection? When we are disconnected, when we feel insignificant, when we don't know what's coming tomorrow, and by the way, we never do, it's a false belief that we think we do, but this is why communication is so important. You've got to over-communicate by 10 times what you think you need to say. That noble cause, 10 times, 10 times, 10 times, over and over again. So if you want people to be high performance, there's 4 components to a healthy, intentional, high-achieving culture. 1 is achievement. The numbers do tell the story. There needs to be goals. There needs to be objectives. But there also needs to be accountability. You've got to have systems. And if you've got remote workers, your accountability system needs to be much higher. Now, not when I was speaking at COVID, remote, I had some CEO that says, well, I know how to have accountability. We put spy cams on the computer. That is not what I'm talking about. But your managers, your directors, your VPs need to be better at accountability. And when we do leadership assessments, accountability for others and self-awareness are the 2 lowest scores out of 79 competencies. So imagine if I don't have self-awareness and I'm weak at accountability for others, do you think the people that work with me are going to naturally excel at personal accountability? If there's no architecture and there's no environment and there's no reason, it's going to get further and further away. So high achievement. Second, an environment, a culture where I can self-actualize at work. There's purpose, there's meaning, there's purpose and meaning in what I'm doing, no matter what role I have. I know the reason that role exists, and it exists more than for me to get a paycheck. These days, people can get a paycheck anywhere. Third element of a healthy, intentional, high-performance culture, what we call emergent culture, is affiliation. That's when people from different departments can work together to solve problems that are not ordinary for them. They're extraordinary. It's an opportunity for them to showcase their critical thinking. And the fourth component of a healthy, intentional, high-performance culture is humanistic, which is really what David's White's entire keynote was about. Tapping into getting real about what's really going on there, what's working and what's not working, what we should do more of, what we should do less of. Or his was just, what's one thing? Like, I recommend that everybody takes that back and teaches the managers and the directors and the VPs, ask those questions, because it shows vulnerability and it also shows concern for the human being. So whether you've got a remote workforce or people are on site, those four elements are critical, and understanding basic human needs is also critical. When you work as a team, especially different departments, different viewpoints, different perspectives, different preferences, even different biases, you can start to get information that is unique. And it's called tapping into the collective, because you are tapping in. And as far as human beings, when they do things and it becomes routine, they start going into subconscious programming, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So building the architecture is critical. Structure, not too much. I'm not talking about policies. I'm not talking about procedures. I'm talking about architecture. How do we bring people into the company? How do we select the right people who want to be here for the right reasons? Then once they get there, how do we teach them to operate in an environment that is ripe for innovation? It's not going to happen naturally. We've got to guide them. We've got to let them know that there's safety, psychological safety, in telling us what we're doing wrong. We've got to teach them how to communicate in a way that is not pointing out complaints and problems, but solutions. And so you need architecture for that. It won't just happen magically. And one of the architectures that we recommend anybody in HR or organizational development or change management learn is liberating structures. It's completely different than somebody standing on stage and talking to you. It's everybody in the group contributing. So it's the architecture that you create, or the lack of architecture that you create, that shapes the environment. And the environment is the energy, how it feels around there. How when you walk in or on a Zoom call and you look at people's face, what's the energy? Is it above the line or is it below the line? If we're all energetic beings, everything going on in the world is impacting us massively. The average human being gets 140,000 bits of information a day. Most of it's negative. 140,000 bits of information. So the average person gets 140,000 bits of information to their span of awareness. Now, this is through email, text, social media, TV, your iPhone, your Samsung, whatever it is, through people sharing, through people talking, and most of it's negative. Guess how, just yell it out, how much information the average person can retain in their brain from that 140,000? 120. So 120 bits to 140,000. So it's not even our work that is giving people cognitive scattering, it's society. And what we've got to start understanding is, if we know the basic human needs, and we know that to create a culture of high performance motivation, energy, and creativity and innovation and teamwork means that we have to understand people, then we have to understand that first, we are competing with all of that noise. Secondly, the average human being, the National Science Institute says, has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. This is inside. It's not even about the outside. Guess what percentage of those thoughts that I create for myself are negative and repetitive? Just yell it out. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. 85% is negative. So that means I'm walking around getting barraged with negativity. My own self is giving me negativity, and then my boss wants to have a conversation with me and mandates that I go back to work. Mandates. No questions. What if I was a top performer working at home? What if I'm doing great? But because there's a mandate, I'm now insignificant and I'm part of that mandate. Be careful what you mandate. You may push people further and further away. So if there's something that I want you to write down, it's 3 things if you're taking notes. At the top, it's the intent. What is the intent of your organization, your noble cause? On this side of the triangle, what's the environment that you're creating? The values have something to do with it, but it's the energy, how it feels in the space, how you start your meetings. Do you start your meetings off with a motivational quote or a poem by David White? Or do you start your meetings with just let's take a breath and get present? Most people aren't present, and it's not their fault. They're just not present. So moods impact energy. The environment of our organization is culture. The architecture is what we build, our artifacts, how we have our meetings, how we bring people up in the organization, how we train our management. The architecture has to serve the environment. You can walk into a company, and I know there's some consultants in the room, and even HR, you walk in the morning and you're like, the smell is off. You could smell the stress. Sean Anker wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. He explains it better than I've heard anybody. Moods impact energy. If I'm low, angry, frustrated, pissed off, do you think my energy is emitting positive juju to my people? Not. If I'm engaged and I'm inspired and I believe in a future that's better than the future I have, and I take time to share that future with people, I spread goodwill. Our moods impact our energy, and the energy is culture. My mood coupled with your mood and your mood in your mood and your mood, that creates culture. So I've worked with a tech company, specifically in the Midwest, and the CEO of that company would get really aggravated when his product wasn't moving forward as fast as possible, and he would scream and he would yell and he would pound the table, and then all of his direct reports would leave the room and go to their departments and do the same thing. He had no intention of screwing up his culture. He had no conscious awareness that he was putting people into a state of fear and anxiety. When they were doing a special ops project and they were creating a new product, he put white paper on all the conference room walls so nobody could see what they were doing. What a message does that send to everybody? It took us 5 years to turn around that culture. And he was a piece of the problem. He didn't trust people. And he was a hothead. So his negative energy threw people what I call below the line, below the power and freedom line, into frustration, fear, and hopelessness. So we talked about the 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. What's important for you is before you go into a meeting with an employee, where am I? What's my mood? Am I ready? Am I grounded? Did I connect with whatever the purpose of this meeting is before you bring them in? This day and age that we're living in with massive evolution in technology requires that we double down on the humanistic side of our business. We have to double down. I've got consultants that work with me. Some of them are extraordinary producers. Some of them are not. Even the ones that are not, in my way of saying, sorry you don't fit with our high standards, I've got to take way more time than I ever took in the past to kiss them goodbye, metaphorically, of course. But I've got to leave them better than they were when they got here, because otherwise I'm not walking my own talk. And there are people who don't perform. And when they don't perform, and you put them on a performance improvement program, and they still don't perform, and you give them the architecture, and you give them the environment, and you pump them up, and they still don't perform, keeping them around poisons the well. And it really, really does, because somebody's carrying the load for them. And that person that's carrying the load, then they don't feel valued, appreciated, or respected. What happens in most organizations is when you introduce a new initiative, a new product, you're buying a new company, you're making some change effort, in most organizations what you have is constrainment or entanglement, like this knot. You see, you've got the people who believe it's the best thing in the world, and they're going to force it through, and they're going to be competitive, and they're going to power up over other people, and they're going to be dominant, and they're going to move people out of the way. And so then you have the other people who say, whoa, 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 wait, have we thought this through? Do we know how this is going to impact? And so they get more and more complacent, or not really resistant, because they get passive. They want to make sure things are right. The more aggressive the aggressors get, the more defensive the defensive get, and we get gridlock. And so you try to initiate change, and you have people nitpicking, or people saying, well, this is why it won't work, and this is why it won't work. And then ideas that were once really fertile ideas that could have changed your business die on the vine because of this gridlock. It's called unhealthy culture, but it's called destructive culture, where you have aggressive defensive against passive defensive. So you've got the people who are screaming and yelling and pounding the table and blaming and shaming. And we know we're not supposed to do that, but it happens all the time, public shaming in organizations. It's why there is such a need for psychological safety. If there was no public shaming and blaming, there would be no need for psychological safety. And what happens is the more aggressive the aggressors get, the more passive everybody else gets, and then we don't move things along. So when strategy clashes with culture, culture always wins. And if you have one vision for your organization, that noble cause, the CEO, and I believe you all, it's your role to create a culture where the vision can be realized, and that's the role. All that admin work, that can be outsourced. And I know people laugh, yeah, tell my boss that. But really, 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 if we need to double down on the human element of our business, on the creating a great place for innovation to prevail, on having an energy that fosters creative thinking and risk-taking, then the majority of your work needs to be spent on that and with people creating that culture. And everything else can be outsourced or automated or done by a robot. And you know there's a lot of things that don't need the level of intelligence that you have to work on them. Your job is to elevate people, and I know you know that. Who's with me? That's the job. So let's talk about a high-performance culture. In a company that has high challenge, meaning we are gonna kill it, we're gonna be market leaders, we're gonna take our company to the next level. We have lots and lots and lots of goals, lots of objectives, and we're always pushing for something new. That company also needs high support, which is what we're talking about. Creating the environment, creating the energy of we're here to elevate people so people can elevate the business. Make sense? Every business is a human system. It's a system made up of human beings. If that system has got some illness or weakness, then we got to fix it. Now, what happens in most companies is I meet with the CEO, and she or he, but mostly it's he, no offense, guys, says, we've got high challenge and we have high support. Then I meet with their executive team, and what do you think they tell me? High challenge, no support, which pushes people below the power and freedom line into fear, self-protection, and manipulation. And by the way, they don't know they're doing it. They're protecting themselves because when you are under stress, your body is filled with cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine, and you can't really think creatively. If you want to dumb people down, give them way too much work and not enough to support or time to get it done. And that's what happens. So we're not going to talk about status quo or depressive zone because this is an innovation conference and you wouldn't be here if you were in either one of those places. As I said, low energy begets low energy. A rotten apple, this is a beautiful biological metaphor. If you put a rotten piece of fruit with ripe fruit, it will rot the other fruit. It's the same thing with energy. We've got to really spend time and effort and nurture the energy of everything we're doing. Those meetings, those Monday kickoff meetings, those stand-up meetings, all hands meetings, that people have to leave there feeling like there's hope. They have to be in a state of courage to get what you want. Another biological metaphor for emergence is a school of fish. Do you know why fish do that? They do that because they're protecting themselves from a predator. In business, you innovate so that you can be market leaders and beat the competition. When we move together, by the way, there's no captain yelling at those fish to say, turn, turn, turn. Same with birds. If you look at how biology evolves through time, recurrence, and environment. There would be no evolution if there wasn't the right environment, if you didn't have a certain amount of time, and if it wasn't the same thing. Notice we have seasons, recurrence, over and over again. That's how you have to train your managers, train your leaders. We've got to invest the time. We've got to teach them the same thing over and over again. Yes, more than 7 times. It's now 10 times because of cognitive scattering. And we have to give them the environment. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, which is, a tech company, Satya Nadella came in and brought Eastern philosophies. The first thing he did is teach nonviolent communication. And if you wanted to be a leader at Microsoft, you had to stop yelling and screaming at people because all that negativity, this is the best case study on the planet, all of that negativity hurt their ability to innovate. So on the closing, this is the 7 levels of personal, group, and organizational effectiveness. I think they're going to give you the slides, but this is an energy barometer. David Hawkins, who is one of the world-renowned neuroscientists, teaches in his book, Consciousness Explained, or The Map of Consciousness. It used to be Power versus Force. Now he rewrote it so people that need to read it in this modern day could. So these are the 7 levels of energy, or because I work in Silicon Valley, we don't say energy, we say personal, group, and organizational effectiveness. When you are in a level of hopelessness, you can only be 5% effective. Fear, only 10% effective, which means 90% of the time, if your employees are in fear, if they're afraid of losing their job, or you're changing their job, or you're going to make them go back home, or I mean go back to the office, or whatever you're doing, that means they are protecting themselves, and they've got norepinephrine, adrenaline, and cortisol, the same chemicals that if they were being mugged would be in their body. And on murder scenes that the scientists scrape off the floor. That's what we do to people when they're in a... No, seriously, did I say? Well, anyway. So that's what we're doing to people. We're putting people in a state of threat, frustration. I can only be effective 25% of the time. Now, I am more effective in frustration than I am in fear, but I'm angry, I'm hot-headed, I yell at people, I blame people, and I move people out of the way. While frustration is the highest level of effectiveness, it leaves a lot of dead bodies and 75% of creative thinking on the table. Now, when I magically jump up to courage, when I believe in a future, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I believe, like Martin Luther King said, or like John F. Kennedy when he said we're going to the moon, and many other people after, when they created a future that people were inspired by, people are in a state of courage. In a state of courage, you're 65% effective. Just moving from upset and angry to believing in a positive future. In a state of engagement, you're 79% effective. In engagement, you're leaning in, you're contributing. You trust that together you guys will get it done in a state of innovation, 89% effective, because we're using the kind of thinking that is not normal, it's not routine. So we're high, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, the same drug when you love drug, happens when I'm in innovation, and endorphins. All of that happens, my aperture opens. If I can get into synchronicity, I'm at 100% effective. Now, the truth is you go up and down that ladder all day long, and the time period that you spend at each level will determine your sense of joy in life and in your organization's culture. The 550 number, which is the megahertz level of energy, 550 means you're in a state of joy. If you could even get your people into a state of 400, most of the time you'll be doing way better than if they're under the line. So culture is energy, and I encourage you to do what you can to lift the energy in the organization so people can co-create, be exceptional at teamwork, have unrivaled innovation, and you can tap into their intrinsic motivation. It's open now for questions. And if you want to do a culture assessment, you can. So what questions do you have? What can I answer for you? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the role of communication?
The role of communication, it's critical. So whatever you're communicating, if you're communicating that you're making a change, so if you have a noble cause, the noble cause is always the beginning of the communication. So the architecture for communication is, this is what we're up to, this is our vision for this company, and this is why we're making whatever change we're making. This is the why. You might think it's obvious, it's common sense, I don't need to tell them, but you do need to tell them because they have cognitive scattering, because they live in a world with nonstop interruption. The second thing is your communication has to speak. Like, don't sit down and write a communication when you're angry. The communication has to speak to the energy that you want to leave people with, which I would say, given the time we're living in, if you can just get people encouraged, you're doing a damn good job. If you can get them in engagement, that's great. And then the cadence of the communication is the architecture. How often? When? It has never been more important than now, especially with disparate workforce. Everybody's everywhere. And if you are a remote workforce and you can bring people together, like for conferences, we used to go to user group, we still do go to user group conferences, but how about company user groups, employee conferences, where people come together 4 times a year to learn? What an amazing novel idea. That's probably the future. Okay, did I answer your question? Thank you. Who else? How about questions on the 7 levels? Yes?
So you talk about understanding people's feelings, right, and getting in touch with their feelings and understanding them. How do you balance that with being positive and having them believe that positivity and changing the culture?
Yeah, good. So just for the record, I didn't say feelings, but you're right. How are people feeling about the organization? If you take that slide, and I think they're going to give it to you, those 7 levels, I have free training on my website that goes into the 7 levels, and I have more information. If you can just use something like that to get people to tune into what is going on with them now, you can actually pull them up. Because to get a frustrated or fearful or hopeless person into action, very difficult to get them into action. And if they're below fear, almost impossible to get them into action. So find out what's important to them. What is their noble cause? What is their intent for working beyond a paycheck? What do they want their life to be about? And when you find that and you can teach your managers to do that, then you relate what they want to what you're asking them to do. And it can't be inauthentic, it can't be a lie, but how is this going to help them get where they want to go? I spent 25 years in recruiting, and one of the reasons I was a top performer is my first question to every candidate was, if you had a magic wand, what would you be doing for your life for work? Nobody ever asked me that question, but I did. Then I would get them a job, and I would say, so I can't make you an actress in Hollywood, but I can give you a job at a promotions company where you can do trade shows, and so you can practice acting at the trade show. Are you interested in that bridge? Every time I gave them a job that could get them to a step forward, as I step forward, every time I gave them an opportunity that would be a step forward, I got a yes. We have to understand that people are on a path somewhere, and it's not lifetime employment with us. If we can tap into what's important to them and have them see why their performance and working on that project matters, we can help them get above the line. And there's actually many, many ways that I show in that response agility training, which is free on my website, that you can get people from hopelessness up to fear, from fear up to frustration, from frustration up to courage. But it's not magic wand, and you can't leapfrog. There is no leapfrogging. You can't deny, as David talked about, you can't turn your back on an organization that's frustrated. You've got to get right into it and say, okay, I feel what's going on. What do we need to do different? And the more you turn into them and their experience of working for you, the more authentic your culture will be and the more real people can be, even about their work. You might have people that really don't want to be there and don't want to do the work you have them doing, but they desperately need the paycheck. But desperately needing the paycheck when I'm in a cognitive scattered world and I'm stressed out isn't going to have me perform. Did that answer your question? Kind of? Okay. All right, I think we have one more question. Okay, yes, ma'am. Yes, Laura.
What are your thoughts on like personality tests for people that you're hiring and how that ties into getting the culture you want?
Yeah, good. So I don't believe in personality testing for hiring. As a matter of fact, using the DISC has been outlawed. It's not, you can use it once you hire, and you can use it for matchmaking in departments or assembling teams. But personality assessments in and of themselves have to be validated, and you have to have it benchmarked to a role. I do believe in psychometric testing, where it looks at what do they value? How do they see people? Do they have empathy? Do they have access to empathy? Empathy is a right hemisphere movement. It comes from this part of your brain. Logic comes from this part of your brain. I want to know the balance between empathy and logic. If we have high logic, low empathy, we're going to have an environment where we don't get people, and people don't feel gotten. And in the tech world, you have a lot of logic, and people haven't had to build the muscle for empathy, and it is possible, especially with neuroscience, because science-minded people will glom on to science. They like it. A lot of engineers hire us because they like the neuroscience. So I believe in an assessment that will tell you what is their balance between people getting work done and seeing the big picture. What's their emotional intelligence? What's their capacity to learn? More so than what is their personality. And I want to say one more thing about that, and then we'll wrap up. Our personalities get developed by the child we once were. Our subconscious is programmed before we're 7 years old. So if I grew up in an environment that was hostile and I had to survive and I had to be a survivor, I'm now 35 or 45, I'm definitely not, or older, and I'm still operating out of that subconscious programming until I take the bag off my head and say, holy cow, I just responded like a 7-year-old. And if I understand that there's a conscious use of self and an unconscious use of self, and I train people to be a conscious use of self, which is an invented way of being, and then I give them the training to build that muscle like Satya Nadella did, then we don't have to worry about that person's a D on the DISC or on the PI. Like, hire people for what their commitment is and who they are. Their personality will ebb and flow. Anyhow, I hope that answered your question and didn't lecture you. Thank you so much for your time.